No one remembers the sound of the first spark, only the silence before it. It was a Sunday night in October, warm and windless, the kind of calm that makes you forget how fragile wood can be. In a small barn behind DeKoven Street, Mrs. O'Leary milked her cow, humming the same tune she'd sung since her husband died. The lantern swayed, the cow kicked, the light trembled, and something ancient in the air seemed to breathe in. People across Chicago were still awake, a boy finishing his homework by candlelight, a father telling his daughter a story about angels. They didn't know the wind would turn against them that night. They didn't know that within hours, the city that promised everything would offer nothing but flame. Some say it was bad luck. Others say it was God, reminding men of their pride. But if you ask anyone who lived through it, they'll tell you the same thing. It began small, almost tender, like every tragedy does. A single flicker, a single sound, and then the world began to glow. Morning came slow and golden, stretching across the rooftops of Chicago like a promise. Streetcars clattered over wooden rails, men shouted prices at the market, and horses snorted clouds of steam into the crisp air. It was a city of dreamers, immigrants, carpenters, bakers, mothers who worked by lantern light, fathers who swore tomorrow would be better. In the O'Leary's neighborhood, children played between barrels, chasing a tin hoop down the dusty road. You could smell fresh bread, hear fiddles from an open tavern, laughter spilling into the street. The preacher's bell rang noon. A woman stopped to fix her shawl, smiled at a stranger. Everything felt safe, solid, as if the world itself had finally decided to be kind. America, people said, is a place where fire only warms the hearth. No one thought about the miles of dry timber stacked side by side, the roofs built too close, the wind waiting beyond the lake. They only thought about Sunday dinners, paychecks, the small victories that make a hard life worth it. Mrs. O'Leary hung her lantern by the stall and fed her cow the last handful of hay. A boy nearby practiced his spelling, whispering each letter into the quiet. Above them, the sunset blazed orange, a beautiful warning no one could read. And in that moment, Chicago felt eternal. That's the thing about peace, you never realize it's fragile until the wind changes. That evening, the air turned unnatural, too dry, too tense, like the world had forgotten how to breathe. The sun bled into the horizon, smearing the sky with red and ash gray. Over the lake, reflections shimmered, trembling without wind. A strange stillness settled, thick enough to taste. In the narrow alleys, laundry lines creaked and shutters rattled against their frames. People hurried inside, uneasy without knowing why. Even the horses seemed to sense it, stamping, snorting, eyes rolling white. The city exhaled softly, but the air didn't move. A milkman stopped mid-step, staring at the dust curling in small spirals around his boots. The smell of metal lingered faintly, sharp and electric. He looked up, clouds gathering low, too dark for dusk. Inside the O'Leary's barn, the lantern burned weakly. Its glass quivered as the cow shifted, hooves scraping wood. The flame leaned toward the open door, straining as if it knew something was coming. Across town, a young woman blew out her candle. The smoke rose in slow, perfect rings before fading into the rafters. A dog barked once, then again, its voice cutting through the stillness until the sound seemed to echo off itself. From the church tower, the bell ropes swayed gently though no one was there. The bell gave one faint chime, dull and uncertain. Strange weather, muttered a man closing his shutters. But it wasn't the weather. It was the pause, that heavy, invisible heartbeat between calm and disaster. The wind stirred once more, a single gust threading through streets lined with wooden walls and open dreams. And somewhere behind DeKoven Street, in the O'Leary's barn, the lantern flickered once, twice. The cow lowed softly. In that fragile moment, history leaned forward. The first shout came from the south side, faint at first, swallowed by the wind, then another, closer, raw with panic. By the time people stepped into the streets, the night was already burning. A single roofline blazed like dawn, then the fire leapt, hungry and alive, racing from house to house as if it had been waiting for this moment. The wind turned violent, snapping shutters and carrying sparks the size of fists through the air. Within minutes, whole blocks ignited, walls collapsing inward, streets glowing red beneath the flames. A mother stumbled barefoot through the dirt, clutching her baby tight. A man tried to drag his piano from his parlor, the wood blackening as the keys shrieked under his touch. Horses screamed inside locked stables, hooves striking sparks against the doors before the roofs caved in. The sky pulsed orange and black, waves of heat bending the air. Ash fell like snow. People ran through it, faces pale, hair catching light. Some shouted for water, others for God. Buckets passed hand to hand, but the water hissed into steam before reaching the blaze. Every breath tore at the throat. Church bells began to ring, not by human hands, but by fire, ropes catching flame, bells tolling themselves as spires split apart. Across the river, men shouted that the water would stop it, but the fire leapt the current, riding the wind. "The river's burning," someone cried. The surface glowed red, reflecting a sky that had forgotten how to be dark. Wooden bridges twisted and fell into boiling water. Sparks skipped across the waves like living stars. A boy called for his mother until his voice cracked and vanished in the roar. A priest carried a metal cross through the street, its edges glowing white. The city's heartbeat was the sound of collapsing timber, thunder made of homes. Windows burst outward in waves, glass fusing into molten streaks. The air itself turned against its people. Crowds surged toward the lake, toward open space, their footsteps sinking in soot. Some fell and were swallowed by flame, others prayed with blistered lips, their words lost to the wind. A woman stopped to pull off her burning shawl, dropped her wedding ring, and kept running barefoot. Then the courthouse roof gave way, a thunderous crack, and sparks rose like souls, scattering into the smoke-thick sky. "Head north," someone shouted, but there was no north, no direction left in a world made of fire. For 2 days, the city burned. By the second night, no one screamed anymore, only the wind spoke, roaring through ruins, holy in its hunger. When dawn came, it arrived without color. The streets were ash. The air held no sound, smoke coiled where houses had been. And in that stillness, Chicago lay silent, a city reduced to memory, waiting to breathe again. By the third morning, the fire had burned itself out, not from mercy, but from exhaustion. What remained of the city looked less like Earth and more like the surface of another planet. Streets once lined with homes had turned to veins of ash. The sky hung low and colorless, heavy with smoke that refused to leave. Every step stirred a fine gray dust that clung to skin, to breathe, to memory. A man knelt where his kitchen had once been, fingers trembling as he lifted a shattered teacup from the rubble. Its edge was smooth from heat, still faintly warm. He turned it over slowly, as though turning it might bring back the voices that used to fill the room. Nearby, a little girl sat on what was left of a stair, her face blank, her eyes fixed on the blackened earth where her house had stood. The wind moved gently through the ruins, whispering through broken pipes and hollow chimneys, the city's own ghost breathing. A priest walked barefoot across the rubble. His robe hung in ribbons, his cross pressed close against his chest. He passed bodies already unrecognizable, crosses of soot drawn where faces had been. From somewhere inside the wreckage came the faint, rhythmic sound of dripping water, steady as a heartbeat, indifferent, eternal. People wandered without purpose, silhouettes against the smoke. Some called out names into the emptiness. Others simply stared at the ground, too numb to cry. "Is it over?" a woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No one answered. The air still carried the taste of smoke and salt. Yet in that stillness, something began to move, the soft scrape of a shovel, the sound of feet against cooling stone. And for the first time since the fire began, the wind carried only rain, light, cleansing, and unbearably quiet. When the smoke finally thinned and daylight touched the ruins, what remained of Chicago looked less like a city and more like the ghost of one, a vast expanse of ash and twisted metal, streets erased into memory. Yet the people stayed. They stood among the blackened bricks and began to dig, with their hands, with shovels, with faith that something could still grow from what had died. No one waited for help. They became the help. Men who had lost everything picked up bricks still warm from the fire, stacking them again with blistered palms. Women gathered children, boiled water over makeshift fires, stitched torn coats, and wrote names of the missing on scraps of paper nailed to poles that leaned like gravestones. At dawn, the city echoed with the sound of hammers and saws, a rhythm steady as a heartbeat. "The city's gone," someone's whispered. "No," another said, lifting a beam. "It's beginning." From the ashes, the grid of a new city took shape. Streets ran straighter, wider. Stone replaced wood, steel replaced fear. Architects sketched visions on soot-stained tables. The railroads returned, bringing lumber, food, and hope. Day by day, smoke turned to dust to scaffolding, scaffolding to silhouettes rising into the sky. Chicago refused to vanish. It learned how to bend, not break. The fire had devoured its body, but not its will. Across the nation, people watched and whispered that maybe this was what America truly was, not untouchable, but relentless. We fall, we burn, we rise again. And somehow, we build higher than before. By the next winter, chimneys smoked again. The lake reflected a skyline reborn, towers of brick and steel gleaming under snow. Children played where the ashes had once been, their laughter filling streets that no longer knew fear. At dusk, the church bell rang clear, defiant, forgiving. Some said the fire was punishment, others said it was destiny. But those who rebuilt knew it was something else, a lesson written in flame, that every ending carries the seed of a beginning. And when the wind swept across the lake, carrying the scent of timber and wet earth, the city breathed again, steady, alive, and wiser. Because in the end, it wasn't the fire that defined Chicago. It was the hands that refused to let it die.